Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Football Baron podcast, where we go some of the matchday fixtures such as Tottenham versus Manchester United, Liverpool versus Everton, and Aston Villa versus Chelsea, as well as some other topics such as which teams will be relegated this season of the Premier League. So for our first fixture that we will be discussing will be the Tottenham versus Manchester United game. Now this game was pretty interesting because I was thinking that Tottenham would look way better with some of their players being returned from injuries, such as Harry Kane. And what it turned out was, of course, Tottenham got an early goal from Steven Bergwijn, January transfer window signing. And you can see how much energy he has because, of course, he's a newer player and hasn't gone through what many other Tottenham players have gone through. But also, Tottenham was looking very fit, looking more fit than Manchester United, pressing Manchester United so that they couldn't build up. And Jose Mourinho even said that at the end of the game. However, Tottenham would later on give away one penalty with Eric Dyer putting too much physical contact with Paul Pogba, where Paul Pogba falls down in the penalty box, and then Bruno Fernandes scores the penalty and beats Hugo Lloris. And then another penalty would potentially have gone through, but with VAR confirming that it wasn't a penalty. But Jose Mourinho brought in a good point when it came to that match, how their team was very tired later on. You could see Harry Kane not being fully fit, and he blamed the lack of fitness. He wasn't blaming the players, but he was blaming that if he had players like Lucas Moura and Dele Alli, who Dele Alli was suspended after a social media post by the FA, and because of that, they couldn't substitute those players on and not get them into the game and give some fresh legs to start pressing Manchester United again. But overall, I think it's a okay performance from both sides, but Manchester United the more disappointed by not getting 3 points, with their side looking to secure top 4 or top 5 for Champions League qualification or even Europa League qualification. Now, speaking of Spurs, I think that Spurs need to invest in new players in the transfer market, because if you look at other teams like Chelsea, who are buying players like Hakim Ziyech and Timo Werner and potentially Kai Havertz, with rumors going around about the player, but I do think Tottenham needs new players that can bring and breathe energy, life back into the team. I mean, Steven Bergwijn, he's doing fairly well. I mean, he's scored a couple goals, scored on his debut. And I think you need those new legs from these new players from the transfer market. And of course, the main problem with Tottenham is they've always been fairly conservative about how they spend their money and what they're going to do with it in the transfer market, looking for more lucrative options, I guess. And of course, Tottenham just needs to invest. If they're going to look to expand on the next season, and potentially what they're looking for is to win a title or win a trophy, they need to focus on securing new players. And I hope that they look at securing new players. But Jose Mourinho, in an interview when they were talking about Chelsea and how they've managed to get so many players with their huge budget, that Tottenham unfortunately won't be able to spend as much as other teams who have bigger budgets and are more capable of spending more of their budget on transfers and bringing in new players for the team. But definitely something that Tottenham should still reconsider. If they can have the investment, they should invest in more players, because they have a new stadium. It's going to be a good foundation for the future of staying in the Premier League and having a solid future. But if they're going to look to win a trophy, which Tottenham desperately needs, especially their fans, they need to look towards spending on new players. They spend on Steven Bergwijn, they need to spend on more players. I think at least Jamie Carragher was talking about, one of the pundits from Sky was talking about they need 4 or 5 players. I think that's very unlikely that Tottenham's going to do it, but maybe 2-3 players. I think if they want to have a chance, maybe Jose Mourinho can pull that off, but still, I highly doubt it, with other key players such as Jan Vertonghen potentially leaving the club, and most likely leaving the club. But definitely a focus for Tottenham and the club as a whole on what they need to do for next season and building on that. Another important game that was on this match day was Arsenal versus Brighton. Brighton looking to secure 3 major points to stay away from the relegation zone, as well as Arsenal looking to rebuild, focus on the rebuild and getting a solid system going, as well as potentially secure top 4 or top 5. But that was shattered with Arsenal scoring a lovely goal from Nicolas Pepe with a curler. That was amazing. But then as soon as they lost Bernd Leno, they did lose Bernd Leno prior to the goal, but when they lost Bernd Leno, it just did not look as clear for the team. With them, Brighton just coming back, and they challenged the goalkeeper, and they scored 2 goals with Neil Maupay, who was one of the players that injured, the player that injured Bernd Leno. He scored a late goal to secure Brighton some 3 points. But this is very, very, very worrying for Arsenal because they lost their main goalkeeper and one of the best performers of their team this entire season. And I think it is something that Arsenal will. I have no idea how long Bernd Leno will approximately be injured, but it looks like a really bad injury based off the review and the video footage. But it's definitely something worrying for Arsenal as a whole, as a club. Losing one of their most consistent performers and their first goalkeeper. And definitely a positive for Brighton, getting them 3 points and getting them ahead of the relegation zone. Another impressive performance from Crystal Palace, who won against Bournemouth with 2 nice stellar goals from a free kick and overall impressive footwork and passing to the build-up over the second goal for Crystal Palace. Definitely something that was positive. However, Bournemouth will not be benefiting at all from that loss, with them reaching closer to the relegation drop zone, and it does not look good for them still. We will be talking about what teams will be relegated in the Premier League. And those teams are around, it's about 3 to 5 teams, or 4 to 5 teams, excuse me, about who will most likely be relegated, or who are the leading candidates for being relegated. Now, for starters, Norwich City is the number 1 candidate for being relegated. I mean, they're 6 to 7 points behind people who are teams who are out of the relegation zone, and I don't think that they have the players or the depth to really get out of it. They can't rely on some of their young stars, such as Todd Cantwell, clawing them out. I mean, they are trying to rely on them, but I just don't think it will be very likely for them. And if they do get out, it'll be some sort of miracle for them to get out of that. And another team, of course, who was also promoted, just like Norwich City, from the Championship was Aston Villa. Now, Aston Villa, they actually have a pretty good squad, and I'm pretty disappointed in how their team overall has played. I mean, they have players such as Jack Grealish, John McGinn, who unfortunately was injured for most of the season but has returned, Tyrone Mings, who is an English national team defender now and has some pretty impressive performances. But I think that their team just doesn't look. There's some parts of the team that just doesn't add up. It just doesn't lead to them getting any wins, or oftentimes they have a lead, but then they throw it away. They rely too much on players. That's also another reason. They have some great players, but they rely too much on them, and they don't have enough of great players or good players to use to win and overall get out of this relegation zone. But I do feel that Aston Villa can get out. I think that they have the potential to stay up in the league, but they will have some trouble. They're 26 points right now, and they're 19th place above Norwich. But another team that I think will go down for sure is Bournemouth, and another team is, of course, West Ham. West Ham is currently out of the relegation zone, but I do think that those teams, who are 1 point away from Aston Villa, will most likely go down. I think that West Ham overall has been putting some incredibly shameful performances for their club, as well as Bournemouth. They just don't. They've had a great stint in the Premier League, but it doesn't look like they're going to stay up just because of the quality and some of their key players not willing to stay for another season and not even willing to extend their contract to the end of the season. And I think without some of those important players that they use and rely on, they just can't. They can't stay up. And I really do believe that West Ham could most likely be relegated. I think Aston Villa will still stay higher than West Ham and Bournemouth. And I think Aston Villa, if they can push through, they can secure 17th place and stay in the Premier League and build off of that. Another team that was in the relegation zone but managed to pry itself out of there was Watford. I think Watford will need to still not stay complacent. They need to still focus and try to maintain their full concentration and keep trying to get out of that zone. But I believe Watford has the mentality and capability to stay in the Premier League for another season. Another matchday fixture that has gone down is Wolves versus West Ham. West Ham, who, as I was talking earlier about teams that are looking to most likely drop out of the Premier League and into the Championship, lost against the Wolves 2-0. And one of the key players for Wolves in securing 3 points and pushing towards Europa League or Champions League qualification was Adama Traore. Adama Traore, I think, is a transfer target or should be a transfer target for many teams. I mean, the man has extreme physicality. He's very muscular, very strong. He can stay and push away defenders, and we saw that with Benjamin Mendy earlier this season, where Benjamin Mendy just got just brutalized by Adama Traore and managed to just lose the ball because he thinks that he can keep Adama Traore away from the ball. But Adama Traore is just very strong, very fast, very, very fast. And he, besides those physical attributes, he's also technically very good. And he gets subbed on in the Wolves versus West Ham game, and he's part of both those goals. He's very useful for Wolves and has been one of the key players, such as Raul Jimenez, for helping Wolves get those key wins and key points for them to be so high in the league. Now, Adama Traore would be an important piece for many teams, and I think that he would probably still be best for Wolves, but he should be a transfer target for some top teams. I think Tottenham maybe, but I don't know if he would go to Tottenham because Tottenham is not looking for their best right now. Arsenal potentially as well, but Arsenal is not looking their best right now. But if some bigger teams such as Manchester City, Liverpool, or any of those are potentially interested in him, I think that Adama Traore would be a good signing, a very good signing for them, for their clubs, because he has some great physical attributes and he's technically very gifted. He's a very strong and lethal winger to have on your side and help you secure wins and get that title or trophy that the clubs want. Another important fixture that was on Sunday was Aston Villa versus Chelsea. Now, in the beginning of the game, Chelsea looked very strong. On the front foot, their players were really pushing Aston Villa and really threatening them in their area, in their defensive area, and in their zone. But unfortunately for Chelsea, despite being on the front foot, Jack Grealish passes it and a nice corner, nice chip-in pass managed to reach a bunch of Aston Villa players as it just crudely went into the Chelsea goal, and Kepa couldn't keep it, with Chelsea players seeming to just switch off at that moment. And I think that it was surprising, really, and not something expected in that game. But then later on, Chelsea came back in. They substituted some players in, namely Christian Pulisic, who brought Chelsea back into the game, leveling it, being subbed in, and scoring a goal for Chelsea's behalf, putting the game at level terms. And onto that, Chelsea scored another goal with Olivier Giroud securing a second goal and helping Chelsea win the game 2-1. Later in the half, as the game went on, it finished at 2-1, and Chelsea got those 3 points that they wanted. However, Aston Villa will definitely be dreading a potential 3 points that they missed out on, as well as a point that could help them get away from that relegation zone and keep pushing and staying in the Premier League. However, the most important game was Liverpool versus Everton, a derby game, and surprisingly, Liverpool had a interesting lineup. Andrew Robertson, Liverpool's left back, and Mo Salah were not present for the game. Andrew Robertson wasn't even on the bench because of an injury, a muscle injury, and Mo Salah was on the bench, but he was still messing around or had a little bit difficulty with fitness, and he wasn't part of the team in the entire 90 minutes due to worries of injuries potentially. And Liverpool was expected to win, but then again, these are different environments, different circumstances that Liverpool has, and Liverpool was dominant in possession. They got the most shots on target, but their team just looked it didn't look well coordinated. Because I think primarily with Andrew Robertson not being on the team. I mean, they had to rely on players like James Milner, but then when James Milner is out and then Joe Gomez comes in, then there's not much you can do when you don't have a left back that's fully understanding of that role and not helping in the attack. But Liverpool they slowed down later in the second half, and Everton for a good 9 minutes was looking on a stronger side, and Everton just did not manage to secure those points to just help them get back at one of their most biggest rivals. But despite Everton being close to getting a potential win over Liverpool, Liverpool still managed to hold off, specifically with the help of their goalkeeper, Alisson, who was still looking very full on concentration despite not being part of much of the game until later when Everton was on the front foot. But both teams will leave the stadium with 1 point and will look to keep pushing, with Liverpool specifically looking to potentially, if Burnley versus Manchester City leads to Burnley winning and Man City losing, then Liverpool can win the trophy, the Premier League, at Crystal Palace. But if Manchester City wins and Burnley loses, then Liverpool could, if they win against Crystal Palace, they can potentially win the title at the Etihad against Manchester City. And I think that would be the perfect ending for Liverpool. Beating the team that has kept them back from winning the Premier League title and winning the Premier League title at the team that stopped them so many times, specifically last season where they were so close but were unable to win the title, with Manchester City beating them at that time. But I do think it would be a great end to a magnificent story for them and their season, and definitely impressive. Now, this game brings up some important points and something that I've been thinking about how Liverpool, if they missed out on Timo Werner. Now, that's okay. They have some other players that they could potentially look to develop, such as Steve Okarigi and, of course, Takumi Minamino. Not Takashi, but Takumi Minamino. And I think that they need to look at a different role, fullbacks. Now, when they lost Andrew Robertson for this game, they looked very, very weak. I mean, just did not very, very weak, as in it doesn't look like their dominant side, because they weren't able to really attack with their left back. I mean, the replacement that they had for Andrew Robertson, who would be marauding up the left flank, running and giving those intense sprints that Liverpool could use for their attack and really get that work rate and good crosses in. They didn't have that for this game. They relied on James Milner to cover him in the left back position. And unfortunately, he had a little minor injury, which led to him being subbed off and Joe Gomez coming on. And James Milner is okay. He's a stable replacement for Andrew Robertson. But, I mean, the man's like 33 or 34, and he isn't fully... He's going to be suffering more injuries due to his age. And it was noticeable with him suffering an injury and leading him to be subbed off. And Joe Gomez is not a left back. He's a center back. And I think it's a thing that needs to be addressed in the transfer window, with them investing in some backups just to challenge and also just maintain that competitive spirit in the team. Because if you look at sides from Alex Ferguson, he had different players that challenged those squads that were the current squads, and challenge those current players to make sure that they keep that role. And with Andrew Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold, one of the key players and important to the system of Liverpool, they definitely need to be challenged to keep developing more and getting better and staying at that level to help Liverpool, as well as they need players that can replace or cover if one of those players gets injured. They need those players to help keep the team balance perfect. Well, that will be all for this episode of the Football Baron podcast. We appreciate everyone who tuned in, and thank you for listening. And if you would like to support us in any way, of course, subscribe on iTunes Podcast, or whatever you're listening on, to Stitcher, Google Podcast. Follow us, rate the podcast. And of course, if you would like to see more content like this, you can go on footballbaron.com, our website. And of course, you can go on our YouTube channel, Football Baron, and look at some of the other content that we have for this podcast, specifically in small clips format if you aren't willing to listen to the entire podcast. Anyways, I would like again to thank you all for listening and hope you all have a great day. Thank you.